Right, I think let's start, Lindiwe.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Social Ownership for Renewable Energy webinar. We're very excited to have this discussion. It is the first of some of these discussions that we'll have, and I would like to just quickly introduce and welcome some of our facilitators and also our esteemed guests panelists to the session. So today we'll have Louise Nodier, who will be who represents the PCC commissioners, who will be facilitating the session. She will use her expert knowledge to help us navigate this topic of social ownership. And then we'll have the team that's leading the research from the Nelson Mandela University, that is being represented by Professor Janet Cherry and also from Professor Darrell van Grenen. They also have a team online that will be assisting with questions. So please do put through your questions on the question and answer section so that we actually have an opportunity to answer them as best as possible. Then we have quite a few guest panelists with us today to speak to some of either global examples and also speak a little to the funding and potential funding of these projects. So we have guest panelists from called Stuart Bartlett from the IDC. He has years and years of experience working within the space and is passionate about this work. Also have Amina Camps. She is from the Scottish Just Transition, and they have actually, she'll be presenting a global case study where they've done a similar project like this in Scotland. And then we have Nombulelo Guare, who is from the Eastern Cape. She's an engineer, and she will be speaking to a local example of what social ownership looks like within our local context. With that, Louise, I will hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome everybody. So we are in the midst of a sort of epochal, is that the right way to say that word? Transition in electricity supply around the world and also in our own country. And, for most of South Africa's electrified life, because there was a time before electrification, Eskom has been the social owner as a parastatal of our electricity supply. Now, renewable energy, allows for much more decentralized kinds of systems. And so with the PCC being charged to look at a just transition in this country, one of the elements of justice could be social ownership of renewable energy. And this keeps bubbling up from different people saying we want social ownership of electricity supply. And so we thought, well, actually, we need to investigate what does that mean? What kinds of ownerships of what kinds of electricity supply qualify to be called social ownership? So that's when we got the Nelson Mandela University to explore that question for us. And so let us start right there and ask you guys to kick off with your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louise. I'm going to start the presentation and then I will hand to Janet. So let me just share screen. And so I thought, just as a way of setting the scene, I would like to just share with our audience, our participants, what the overall objective of the project was. our brief was to assess the socially owned renewable energy models, and then identifying different barriers, challenges, and community-specific solutions. And from that, we were asked to present some financing case studies and institutional barriers. And with that, proposing what we term a work program for pilot project selection. In this process, we established some criteria and to determine which of the models were more suited than others. And from that, we also embarked on a process of looking at other areas where the models have been implemented and where they are working and have worked, but also so looking in the global north, but also the global south, and then bringing it right back home to our very own Nelson Mandela Bay area to look at what is happening here, and then also in the surrounding areas. So having said that, we went through quite a rigorous process of a literature study. And once the basic criteria were established, formulating the models, went out to consult with different stakeholders, and there were quite a number of stakeholders, and Janet will elaborate more on that as she goes through the different models. And from their feedback, we then formulated the work programs. So what you will see today is the presentation of 4 of the models that we deem to be viable. There is some financial modeling that has been done, and when we come to question and answers, I would like to invite the audience to please ask questions. As said, we have a number of our colleagues online, and they are here to answer questions, but in the essence of time, we're not going to go through all of that. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Janet to take you through the different models.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can all hear me. And just to say, as a way of introduction to the models that we're going to present, that, you know, our overall approach to this whole problem was to understand the transition to renewable energy as a massive opportunity for a more just economy, for economic justice, if you like, in South Africa, rather than seeing it as a threat. So there's a public perception that the transition to renewable energy is going to cost us hundreds of thousands of jobs. And we approached it from a different perspective, which was to say, what is the potential for the technology of renewable energy, in particular PV solar, but not exclusively, but for that technology to allow for social ownership, for a distribution of productive assets to large sectors of the population. So this was a sort of turning the problem into a possibility. Secondly, just to say, this transition is happening, and it's happening very rapidly at the moment, as I'm sure you are all aware. We saw this as looking at what is in between Eskom as centralized public state ownership, and we don't consider Eskom to be social in itself. Eskom is public, it's the state. What is between that and privatization, which is seen as by certain stakeholders, particularly labor, as a threat that everything is privatized. So we said, what is between the two? Well, it's a whole range of possibilities in terms of social ownership. And thirdly, we then looked at what is the current situation in terms of the implementation of these models in other parts of the world. And we looked at, as Darrell said, both global and local contexts, what has been done. And we've found that there are examples in the world where there is quite extensive social ownership of renewable energy. And in South Africa, it is extremely limited. So the pilots that do exist are very, very, very small scale. And we felt overall that there needs to be a much more ambitious approach to social ownership. And this is, it's something which, in fact, the president mentioned last year, I think in the beginning of last year, he talked about, and I'm quoting, massive rollout of rooftop solar. So does massive rollout of rooftop solar mean that only the wealthy people who can afford to put up solar panels in their homes are the ones who benefit from this transition? Does it mean that it's only the big multinational or foreign manufacturers of renewable energy who are the investors who benefit from this transition? Or is there a way in which it can be more socially and economically beneficial to people? So this informed our approach to the whole question. We came up with 4 quite different models, each for a different context, and we tested them against various criteria, including that they obviously must be technically feasible. We looked, they must be socially owned, and we had a specific definition of that. And they needed to be fundable and financially viable, and they had to have benefit for the owners, obviously. So benefit in various ways. So we looked at those different criteria, and then we developed a modeling tool as well with a spreadsheet, which will allow for actually empowerment of those social owners themselves in the process of establishing such socially owned renewable energy projects, where they could understand and have clear expectations of what the benefits would be, and be able to participate in the process of actually modeling those projects so that they can see how they would work themselves. So we think that this tool is actually quite an interesting addition to this. But let me go through the models, and I've got members of our team who are online here who each worked on a different model and did extensive consultation with stakeholders for that particular model. And so they will be available to engage with questions about the models themselves. So the first one is a mini grid, which we looked at specifically for the communities, i.e. rural villages, actual communities in a rural context, or informal settlements, which do not have grid access. And of course, the main benefit there is access to electricity. But we found that the pilots that have been established so far have actually been far too limited and haven't met people's needs for electricity. And the potential is for cooperatively or community-owned mini grid to produce a surplus of electricity, which can then be used for stimulating local economic activity and social benefit in other ways. So without going into detail about that, I'll go on to, in fact, Darrell, if you can go to the next slide, I can just show people how we modeled this. So then this is just a dashboard of the model for, this is, it's for 1,000 households, and it basically, we can take you through how we establish the model on a spreadsheet basis, and what we can gain from that. And then if you go on to the next slide, no, that's the, all right. No, leave that. Just go back to the, yeah, that one will be fine. Yeah, if you go on to this second slide there, the second model was for a grid-tied township cooperative, a renewable energy cooperative. And again, this model we saw as potentially something which would bring economic benefit to huge numbers of people who are basically working class communities living in townships where there is established infrastructure. So there's already a grid connection. it would provide municipalities with electricity supply and would contribute to municipalities. We've tried to look at this in terms of the way in which municipalities are struggling at the moment to pay for electricity. And we think that it is viable to do this in such a way that it's a win for both the residents of these townships and for the municipalities. Okay, let's leave aside the role of Eskom for the moment, but this is what we are imagining in this model, that municipalities are absolutely critical. And of course, as we know, municipalities need to be capacitated to engage in this. The current regulatory framework is not ideal for this model to work, and it also involves some changes at that level. But there is a huge opportunity there. And again, we don't see this as a threat. We see it as something which could be really beneficial to municipalities and to local industries, because it would provide a surplus of electricity for industries. The third model, and you can go on to that one, is the community land IPP. And this is based on the existing renewable energy independent power producer procurement program. And what it's looking at is a private partnership, as in the current REAP program, where the benefit is to communities which already have access to land. So what this means is that this is where there is either a communal land ownership under traditional authorities, or there is a community who are land reform beneficiaries. And we thought it would be beneficial either to the most impoverished areas, which are former homeland areas under traditional authorities, but where land is actually owned in common, or land reform beneficiaries, and link it into the land reform program. So there's enormous pressure politically for land distribution, but for that to be really beneficial in the way that the REAP program is actually beneficial to commercial farmers at the moment in South Africa. So it's trying to link the renewable energy, the private investment through the private renewable energy companies to programs for rural development and land reform. And then the fourth model, which also is very important in terms of the transition to renewable energy within the motor and component industry, where we're now faced with the issue of CBAM, which is again is seen as a threat, because if companies do not transition to renewable energy, then they will be punished by the European or other companies which are buying their produce. So there's a huge pressure for that transition to happen, but there are obviously economic implications of that. And we looked at how, as this transition happens, it can allow for workers who are either members of trade unions or workers in a particular factory to be the owners of renewable energy installation. So we talked about embedded generation on a factory roof, for an example, and we modeled it for that. But we didn't see it as exclusively that. I mean, it could involve repurposed power stations or in rooftops of other large institutions, commercial institutions as well. But we did model it for a factory of 1,000 square meters, I think. So there has been quite a lot of consultation with trade unions and with business owners, and I think we can go into more detail about that. And of course, it also does involve quite extensive capacitation and understanding of what this means, what exactly the benefit will be, what the owners of that installation can expect in terms of income or revenue, what the price would be. Is it viable for the manufacturer in this case to procure their electricity from this worker-owned SSEG rather than from Eskom, etc. So again, this model is seen as absolutely critical in terms of the saving of jobs, to put it quite crudely, in the motor industry. But if it were linked, and I'm sort of being quite speculative here, but if it were linked to programs around green industrialization and green mineral value chains in SADC, and green hydrogen production, which is also scheduled for this region, you know, there could be multiplier effects which resulted in much greater benefit than for one particular factory. Okay, so let me stop for the moment. I think I've been talking a lot. Maybe just to say, there's one other thing that we did for this work program, which was to suggest a process whereby these models could be explored further, what it would involve in terms of capacity building and working with different stakeholders and so on. And to say, I think people understand that there's quite a lot of caution, can I say, or nervousness on the part of some stakeholders. Labor, critical for this model. Municipalities, who are critical for the second model, about this transition. So getting them on board to test particular pilots out and show the benefits of them is important. And then I think just lastly, Darrell, if you can go to the slide at the end where I looked at the comparative benefit. I won't go through all the funding and regulatory issues at the moment because they're quite general, but the last one, not this one, this one. So we were asked to look at what is the comparative benefit of each of the models. And model one, which is the mini grid, is really focused on the social benefit of access to electricity, which is absolutely critical. And it relates to the position of rural women in terms of labor saving, and children in terms of access to light and education and internet and all these kinds of things, as well as the potential for local economic benefit and business hubs in rural areas, etc. The township co-op model I've talked about, but it's really also has implications possibly for manufacturing of renewable energy components if it were linked into that kind of manufacturing or industrial policy. And the community land REAP, we're saying this can link to benefit for rural communities as well as for land reform. And the fourth one I've talked a bit about in terms of the focus on transitioning industries and the potential for job creation in new renewable energy industries. So we think that all of these four models are viable, but they all need to be tested in a real context to see how they would work. Let me stop there for the moment and see how we want to go forward.
Thank you very much, Professor Cherry and Darrell. So I think what's wonderful is that you've given us enough of a framework for a discussion, and now we can really dig into it a little bit. So I open it to everybody who might want to ask questions of clarity or want to make points of their own to contribute to a discussion. Because it'll be nice if we can manage to have a sort of conversation between us, not just a dialogue with the presenters. I do ask people if they have specific questions, put those in the Q&A, not in the chat, because then, you know, we can have people responding to those questions, even if you can't get time in the meeting to raise the issue. Right, open to all.
Louise, there is a question in the question and answer section.
Yes.
And I thought it might be good to actually answer this, or that Professor Cherry actually has an opportunity to answer. It reads, can we get more details on the engagement with trade unions as indicated? Yeah, that's the question.
Please go ahead in answering.
And I see there's actually 3 different questions on the chat, on the Q&A.
Yes, but let's just answer that one about labor, because I'll deal with yeah.
All right. So there were 3 processes really in the stakeholder engagement. We had a dialogue organized by the Climate Justice Coalition, and a number of the trade unions and federations were represented there, and they gave their input and expressed their opinions on this. We then had a process of sending out a survey questionnaire. I think Darrell can go into more detail about this, and people who wanted to respond gave input in that way. And then thirdly, we solicited discussions and interviews with particular people. So for example, for the work for each model, so that worker SAW model, for example, was consulted with representatives of NUMSA. And in the dialogue, I think the major federations were represented, and we've also had consultations with some individual unions. So SAMWU, Municipal Workers, NUMSA, and what was the other one, Tony? SAMWU and just those 2. Yeah.
So the question comes from Ms. Boitumelo Molete from COSATU, and she heads up COSATU's work on the just transition. So I think, you know, that's why it's a very important question for her to raise, and I think one needs to loop her in. Okay, I see 3 hands, or more hands maybe by now, but 3. Andile, Mr. Malambo, would you like to raise your point? And then it'll be
thank you very much.
Ms. or Mr. Tengwa.
Yes, thank
Okay,
you. I
Andile.
don't know if am I audible?
You are audible, but let's
supposed to
take
go
Mr.
first.
Mlambo first, and then you'll be next.
All right, thank you, Louise. Greetings, everybody. So my name is Andy Mlambo from Grassroots for Climate Action. So I just needed clarity on the private partnerships with IPPs. So quickly, so there was an article that was published by an online publication called My Broadband on the 2nd of October. So they were saying there are 55 solar power stations that are feeding clean energy. And the article went on to say, this is according to the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy's IPP projects database. So 51 is a big number, meaning, yeah, according to this article. So my question is, has there been any oversight to see if it is practical and is really happening that communities where these power stations have been built, according to this, of course, that people do benefit? It is actually practically socially owned. That's my question. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Mlambo. Ms. Tengwa, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Lois. Greetings, everybody, and thank you, Professor, for the presentation. I'm starting to think about a number of things here.
Maybe just introduce yourself for those who don't know you.
Yes, sorry about that. My name is Tumisa Tengwa. I work for eThekwini Municipality. I'm the deputy head responsible for biodiversity, also overseeing the functions of climate change and energy transition. So with regards to this issue of social ownership, and linking that to the justice within the transition. I look at our situation as a eThekwini where we have an ambition of having at least 50% of our energy coming from renewables, using different models, maybe own generation and independent power producers. So for me, it's a bit broader than what has been presented here. We want to be deliberate about, ensuring that a large percentage of ownership of this alternative energy is by the previously marginalized. And none of the models that I have seen so far are actually helping us to achieve this. Looking at the value chains of like the production, because we're going to become one of the biggest procurers of alternative energy and the entire value chains that are linked to that. Are we ready? Do we have the markets? Is the market ready locally? Because right now, and speaking to the city of Cape Town, they get their solar panels and everything to do with that. Those are shipped from Joburg. Huge carbon footprint, and Joburg is not manufacturing these things. So for me, the ownership also goes into the markets, the manufacturing capacity that needs to be looked at. I'm looking for, some of the examples that will show how this can actually happen. And as a municipality, we are not in the business of, forming, establishing social constructs and all that. So this is going to be a new area of that we will need to be capacitated on. So that's why I am here, and I need, there's a lot that I want to imbibe from these discussions. But from that broader perspective, I see that there's already a lot that we are not doing. We're talking about wheeling tariffs, we're talking about SSEGs. Right now, only people that can actually afford that are able to transfer excess power to the grid, and they get, something back from their bills. Why should those people be the only ones that are actually benefiting from a situation that is actually affecting all of South Africans and mostly the poor? I feel like, if we can also look at solutions that will deal with that issue as well, so that SSEGs, the SSEG process is not just benefiting those that can afford. I'm going to leave it there for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to take one more hand, and then we'll give the presenters a chance to respond. Mr. Morgan. Mr. Morgan, we're not hearing you. There are also lots of questions in the Q&A, which I think the presenters can take their leisure, to answer after this verbal exchange. They can be answered in writing online. Ms. Nzwana, do you want to come in?
Oh, yes. Thank you so much. Can I speak my language? I'm Lindy Nzwana from Grassroots for Climate Action. So, Professor Janet, just would like to share the program that we have as Grassroots for Climate Action. Renali program e socially owned. Ko di provincing tse 4. So Professor Janet Kiboni unali 4 models tse di in your research. So I don't know how to cluster this one, because the main objective the program is it was about, because there was this myth about renewable energies. So and then at Life Africa had to initiate this program, and ki omong wa batho ba benefiting from this program, Kiko Valley. and how it works, what we are doing, like njengoba ke tsholo hore ke one of the beneficiaries, the system installed ho nna mona ko Vaal, and because I've opened my house e choositswe hore ebe the program, ebe the show house hore batho kaofela, especially ka mona ka Everton West or Vaal kaofela ba kgona ho bona hore ana ha re bua ka solar system, ha re bua ka renewable energy, ke ntho e jwang, e sebetsa jwang. So ke ka ho ba tlileng ba tlo installer ho nna mona. So basically se etsahalang ke hore all my communities, they come here and charge their phones, their laptops, their lights, everything. And the main objective in ele hore batho ba understand hore ha re bua ka di solar energy e re create yang from letsatsi, it is impossible. And basically it was also about showing our government hore the programs they saw, especially for the household, including the municipalities, ke di programs tse government wa rona a ka kgonang hore a di roll out ho di household tse senang income e itseng. Remember, mona South Africa, re na le issue ya load shedding, energy poverty. So if all the households tsohle di ka ba le program e so, and in your models, you mentioned the cooperatives, you mentioned the informal settlements, you mentioned the ownership whereby batho ba ka share these programs. So as I'm speaking to you now, we do have the program like that we can also use as a course study for this socially owned program and research ka yona. So with your social and with your models, I don't know ukuthi this program okay cluster ka tsela efeng. I just wanted to share this whatever that research remember that we also have programs like these ones already that are in our communities that you can also use as case studies. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nzwana. I really appreciate that, because I think, you know, the research team has created 4 categories because somehow we need a way to grapple with all the different possibilities. But it's really important that people speak like you have from, you know, personal experience of different kind of things that have been tried. And the research team can either fit it in under one of the categories, or perhaps it will also, you know, lead to creating a different category entirely. Now, I mean, I'm just going to check that I understood what you were saying, that your house has been used as a demonstration and a renewable energy system has been put on your house that you then share with members of your community so that they can come and use that electricity, because it's, you know, the actual sun is free, so nobody has to pay for that. And you are calling for an example where all lower income houses would get their own renewable energy installations as another model. So thank you for raising that. Have I got it right, Ntabiseng?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. All right. So let's take responses from the team to those 3 inputs, and then we can take another round of hands.
Thanks, Louise. Can I ask on the first question, Andile's question about the benefits from the IPPs? Can I ask Hola Vlokas to respond to that? She's done quite a lot of analysis on the benefits from IPPs. Hola, are you online? I think, yeah, Hola, can you speak?
So while she sorts her sound out, perhaps go to the next comment.
Okay.
Hello, I think you can hear me now.
Yeah,
Yes,
we
go
can.
ahead,
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, indeed, Andila, I just posted a link to a website that also, is used quite widely in research, even in government as well in parts. Just shows all the different projects across the country. So through the program that Prof. Sherry mentioned earlier, the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Procurement Program that started in 2011, over 100 projects, IPPs, independent power producers, have been procured. So we've got those large-scale wind and solar projects all across the country, and about 90 or so are currently operational already, so feeding into the grid. And part of that policy that in short we call REAP is also, or were until recently, the requirements have just changed, but until recently, the requirement was for those projects to be in part owned by communities. So a minimum of 2.5% of the project shareholding was meant to lie with an entity that represents communities that either live in a 50-kilometer radius around projects or in the district municipality. So you would find that most of those solar and wind farms have a community trust, a community development trust associated with the project company, and that trust holds shares in these projects. In addition to that, there are also funds that the IPPs or the wind and solar projects needing to spend locally, and those are usually for enterprise development and socioeconomic development. So that's just a rough overview. Very happy to answer more detailed questions, of course, as well.
Thanks, Hola. Mr. Mason. Oh, no, sorry. All the other discussion. Carry on, Janet.
Okay, so let me deal with the question from eThekwini municipality.
Yes.
I mean, this is a really critical issue, and it relates to, local procurement, public procurement processes by municipalities. And if municipalities are involved with large-scale renewable energy installation, which I think they should be, where do they procure this from? What industries are involved? Is it all foreign, Chinese solar panels, etc.? And it relates to industrial policy. So in our research, we didn't go into industrial policy and how we could model ownership of the industries that are producing the components for renewable energy. I do think that is an important point, but we looked at in a more limited way at how we could get worker ownership of embedded generation or IPPs to support existing industries rather than the mineral value chain or the value chain of creating new industries, which I think is really important, but it wasn't within the bounds of our project. And I mean, you are absolutely correct. I mean, this whole thing about municipalities wheeling tariffs, feed-in tariffs, it just hasn't been implemented to the benefit of ordinary working class people. So that's what has to be done. I mean, it's not a mystery. I mean, you are absolutely right to say that when like middle class households who can put up solar panels are able to feed their surplus and get a rebate on their municipal bill, etc. But most people can't do that. They are energy poor because they can't afford it. They can't buy energy, and they can't buy solar panels. So we have to find a subsidized solution which municipalities can implement. And we are arguing quite strongly that a higher percentage of the JETP financing should go into socially owned renewable energy. And we are saying this should be what we call a social public partnership, i.e. it should be a partnership between municipalities and residents of a particular municipality. So those residents then are not individual middle class consumers. They are then formed into some kind of cooperative or neighborhood organization. We saw this as being possible to implement as well in inner city tenants, like blocks of flats or hostels or whatever. And we've seen examples in Europe where many tens of thousands of tenants, you don't have to be the owner of a huge property. Tenants of a flat can be part owners in a cooperative manner of a renewable energy installation. It is quite possible. We know of examples around the world where this happens. So that is another alternative. Yeah, then the third question, Lindy's question, I didn't understand it entirely, but I think we have also looked at a model for informal settlements, and where you could have some kind of energy hub for an informal settlement. We think that the pilots that exist at the moment they're really good in terms of demonstrating the benefits of renewable energy and how people can understand it and access it and so on. But they're not extensive enough. I mean, they need to be scalable. We need to have hundreds of thousands of people accessing renewable energy. So I mean, I think it's a very important idea.
Thank you. Okay, we need to respect everyone's time and move on to the next set of contributions. But I'm going to take a last round of hands because people have been waiting. Mr. Mason, and then Commissioner Fourie, and then Mr. Morgan. You want to have another chance at this?
Thanks, Louise. Yeah, so it's Simon Mason here from the EDP, Economic Development Partnership. I just wanted to, it's sort of reflecting on the question in the Q&A that I asked earlier, but probably turning it more into a commendation, because when we held the Climate Justice Coalition dialogue, I think there wasn't really that socially owned aspect. It was more focusing on the community owned aspect in the models, but especially from what Janet's been speaking to now, it does seem to be shifting over more to the acknowledgement of, in terms of scale, that partnerships with municipalities, etc., are essential. And I wanted to just speak to, or would like you to speak a little bit more to that. Are there any kind of examples internationally where it's happened in, I know there are a lot of energy communities in the global north, but it's a very different playing field when you're talking about inner cities or informal settlements, and kind of the risk of ownership and the responsibilities of ownership is quite high. And there have been some people within the field that have expressed to me in my consultations that actually we don't want to be looking at that falling to poorer people at all, that we would want to rather see the facilitation of affordable and reliable electricity supply or energy supply, but not actually push the ownership agenda, that it's more of a kind of performative aspect of that if you're entering into the ownership game. So I just wanted to hear a little bit more about the models that where the risk and the responsibility lies more to municipalities, to the benefit, or otherwise to other state entities or otherwise, and the benefits fall to more vulnerable communities.
Thanks, Simon. Commissioner Fourie.
Hi, good afternoon, and thanks everybody. I have a question about a proof of concepts, and it really comes from, I think, the general concern, the growing concern that we need to start delivering projects on the ground, in the context of the JRIP, but also more generally in support of the just transition. Starting to kind of create, obviously, access to electricity or grow access to electricity, but also kind of start growing communities and workers' interests in the green economy, right? So I'm really interested to know, and I'm sorry if I'm jumping ahead, I don't have the agenda in front of me, but, do we have examples of where this is working, both locally and globally? And more importantly, practically speaking, and speaking also to civil society and organized labor, is what it is that we need. How do we need to organize ourselves to maximize this opportunity, really? Because it's, obviously capital is a huge issue, and, that's going to be a big discussion. but we also need to be ready to be able to use that capital, right? And make the best of this moment. You know, I'm aware that the finance that we see coming in here is not going to be available forever, and we really need to use this moment to get ahead on this very exciting issue. So I would just appreciate your reflections on that. Thanks, Louise.
Thank you, Melissa. Mr. Morgan?
Am I audible?
You are heard, sir.
Oh, finally. So greetings to everybody, and thank you for this important conversation. My name is Sunny Morgan. I'm a climate justice activist, but I also am the owner of a renewable energy company. I've been working in this space for a long time, but my focus as an activist has been on socially or community-owned renewable energy. I've been writing about this for almost a decade and trying various models for almost a decade. There are many people on this call that I've either engaged with professionally, installed solar, or experimented with different models around socially and community-owned renewable energy. Whether it's on school roofs, whether it's on factory roofs, whether it's a hub in an informal settlement. And I want to differentiate. So I use socially and community-owned interchangeably, but I want to differentiate between commercial ownership and beneficial ownership, because there are quite a few beneficial ownership models in the country already. I personally installed a solar installation in an informal settlement as a donation, where the community benefits. So people come and charge their phones, they come and access the internet, they have computer classes. That's in the Johannesburg area, open for anyone to go and have a look at. It's the Slovo Park informal settlement. So what would we refer to that as? Because we gave it to the community, they own it. That's a community-owned renewable energy installation that has been functioning for almost 2 years. In Bramfisherville, we have donated, and I think this speaks to the other comrades' comments who spoke in the vernacular about what kind of ownership and what kind of beneficial benefits flow to people who have this. A very well-known celebrity in South Africa, perhaps now on the international stage, has worked with an organization when I was the technical partner to provide individual solar installations to 80, almost 100 individual homes in Bramfisherville. So what would we refer to that? What would we refer that to as? Is that a community-owned energy installation, privately owned energy installation? Because we know in our communities, the people share the energy. So I want to go back to this fundamental thing. It's a pity that we still don't have enough of a case study. I've worked with Professor Cherry before, and that's probably the most famous installation, or most famous or most well-known energy installation in the country that meets this criteria of socially or community owned. But it's sadly lacking that we don't have enough data to depend on, because all of these models depend on one thing. We need a prototype of all of these models that Janet is talking about, and so that we can experiment with what is workable. My view is a bit more revolutionary, so I don't want to talk about municipal ownership and partnerships with municipalities or partnerships with government. I want to be able to talk about communities taking the bull by the horns and trying to exercise this opportunity to their benefit. And I've written a paper on this, an essay more than maybe 6 to 8 years ago, and I wanted to identify what do we mean by socially or community owned. Are the communities the beneficiaries, the commercial owners, the workers, the operators? All of these things are very, very important to address. And I want to close by saying that I'm busy working on identifying a community where we can do a 20 to 50 kilowatt microgrid. The funding for that, coincidentally, was going to come from the global north, where a commune has a community-owned renewable energy installation, and they are the financial beneficiaries of the income stream. And I wrote a proposal, and they are thinking about funding that proposal with the income. I think it's 10,000 euros, which is their collective income over a few years from the energy that they've sold to the university. in Germany. So we need more exploration about that. But the other issue is the lack of education about what this actually is, because there's other people on the call that will tell you that we've installed 20 kilowatts in 5 schools that were given to the schools, but because there wasn't a sense of ownership, 50% of those solar panels have been stolen, and those installations now lie idle. So we need to identify
Thank you,
the
Mr.
ownership
Morgan.
models. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think you're raising an interesting question about when is social ownership, and when is it a donation, a generous donation, but not necessarily socially owned. And I see that there is also in the Q&A a question about really understanding what the NMU team is defining as social ownership. So perhaps you would answer that in the Q&A, because we will now. I also want to say something about if I can use a really horrible term actually, but the social infrastructure to support social ownership is very important. And, some of our commissioners have remarked that some of this JETP IP money should actually go to build community structures, because you can't have community-owned renewable energy if there isn't a decent community structure with proper, constitution and how they govern themselves and so on. So I think that's also quite an interesting aspect of this. Okay, so now, I think this program is too short, and there are so many issues to discuss around this that I hope we would have a follow-up actually. But let us now welcome 2 people who are going to talk to us about on-the-ground examples. And the first person is
Louis. I'm unmuted.
Yes, Mr. Bosaletse, can I ask you to put yours in the Q&A, and they'll answer it online, and also come back in at the end of the following inputs, and then you will be first. Okay.
Thanks, Louis.
Okay. So Ms. Amina Camps from the Scottish Just Transition, you've got an example for us of how you did it there, so please take it away.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's Dr. Amina Camps. I'm a commissioner with the Just Transition Commission in Scotland.
Sorry, fumbling about.
No worries.
I believe you know my colleague, Mr. Banks.
I do, yes.
Yes.
I actually have numerous jobs as well. So I have a day job, which is working in the circular economy, and I'm still supporting the project I'm going to talk to you about today, which is Uist Wind. So I'm manager of that project, and before that I was the development officer. So just based on some of the questions that you were just discussing, then just to go right back to the beginning with the project story. So we have a development body in Scotland, where we have numerous development bodies in Scotland who fund and support community development projects and community trusts. And they tend to provide development officer funding for communities, particularly for communities who are known to be more deprived. So they may find it more challenging to be able to develop community projects. So North Uist, which is an island in the Western Isles of Scotland, that was recognised as one of the most deprived communities in that municipality, the local authority area. So they were funded to have a development officer to develop a number of community projects, and renewable energy was one of those projects. So the project Uist Wind actually took over 10 years to develop, So it was, there was a lot of roadblocks. It is a 1.8 megawatt wind turbine project. And it is wholly community owned. So that means the community have developed the project right from the beginning, sought planning permission. There is a company set up to manage that process. They acquired the funding, they appointed project managers for the construction, they got the contracts in place for the maintenance of the wind turbines, and we now operate that wind farm. So that's an example of wholly owned projects. And yes, you'll note that there's a large number of these wholly owned community projects in Scotland. And a lot are much bigger than this one's. So this project, US Wind, it was one of the last projects to get a feed-in tariff subsidy, with the subsidy de-risking community projects, basically. So it supports then acquiring the finances to be able to develop and construct the project. And there was a funding gap, however, because of how long it took to develop the project. The feed-in tariff subsidy rates had dropped considerably. So with it being one of the last to acquire those subsidies, it meant the financial modelling showed that the finances were quite delicate, which meant the senior lender would only lend up to a certain amount, and that left £1 million gap. So they would lend £2 million, but there was £1 million funding gap. Part of that £1 million funding gap was filled by the Scottish Government through their investment bank. They had a dedicated renewable scheme to help loan money to get projects off the ground. And part of that was funded through what's called a community share offer. So the company that was a company limited guarantee was converted into a community benefit society, and that enabled a share offer. And we have 220 community investors who support the project, and they are now members of the project. So they get a small return on their investment each year. And then when it comes to the 7th year of operations, that we will start to repay some of that investment. It is different than a lot of the other projects that had a much higher subsidy rate. So they are bringing in a lot more money than we are. A key factor of it as well is because these are wholly community-owned projects, then all of the profit, any profit at all, goes to the community. So the whole purpose of it is to develop a community benefit fund for the local community. That community benefit fund has a community investment plan, so which is renewed regularly, which involves wide stakeholder engagement. So we engage with the whole community to update that community investment plan. And the whole purpose of that is to meet the need of the local community. So all of the fund is directed to meet those gaps. Like if you've got certain areas where investment needs to be targeted, for example, because it's an island, we have a massive depopulation issue. So the investment needs to support that depopulation, to reverse that depopulation issue, and other things such as like small business grants to help small business get off the ground, and lots of other things. But the important thing is the community decides how that money is spent. There was a study done in Scotland about this wholly owned community energy model, and it identified that the community energy projects brought in 34 times more than what was recommended as the industry standard for community benefit. So there are best practice guidance within Scotland for providing community benefit from a commercial stance, and community, because of 100% of the profit going to the local community, that means that 34 times as much is delivered. And if you think about that subsidy rate as well, all the subsidy is therefore is the de-risking element. It provides a small amount of the funding that is the income that is brought in. A big chunk of that is the power purchase agreement rates. So you're leveraging additional money into that community. And obviously, if you've got that funding pot for the community, then that means there's less demand on applying to the government for that funding. So I hope that gives an introduction. And if you've got any questions, let me know.
Thank you very much. That's quite a fascinating example. Let's turn to an example in our own country, and we'll take questions on your input, Dr. Camps, after that. Ms. Guarube, from the consulting engineers, you've implemented something in this country. Please tell us about it.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for having me in this platform. I will be sharing the experience of a successful project that the Eastern Cape government has implemented in the Upper Blinkwater, a village that is in Fort Beaufort in the Eastern Cape. The project was birthed from a bilateral relationship between the state of Lower Saxony in Germany and the Eastern Cape government. That was in 2015. A political decision was taken to implement a mini-grid hybrid project in Upper Blinkwater. There's been a time where there were about 4 sites that were selected for the project. And at the time, I was working for the municipality as an engineer, and I've selected Upper Blinkwater, and it took about a year for the decision to take in terms of which site is recommended for the project, which was the Upper Blinkwater, Upper Blinkwater in Fort Beaufort. How the project started, there was an engagement with the community. You know, for any project that you want to do, the municipality, the local municipality is very key to contact, because you can't do anything in their communities. So they are the door to the communities. Also, the ward councillors are very key, as they are the overseers of what is happening within the villages, and also the ward committees that helps the ward councillors. So there was a meeting with the Department of Economic Development. The project came through that office, and the leader was Mr. Alistair McMaster, who's the senior manager in renewable energy. And it came through the municipality via the development agents that was available at the time, and the local municipality. So there was an initiative, an initial meeting where the GIZ with DDIT presented the project to the municipality, and the municipality accepted the project as we all know that electricity is the basic need. It is a basic service delivery that is required. It's no longer luxury to have electricity like in the olden days. So there was an agreement to carry on with the project after it was selected. I have had many meetings with the community to come and explain the type of project that is coming, because we had to first explain that Eskom is not coming. Basically, the project was in response in the alleviation of energy poverty in the areas, and this area is very remote. And also the Department of Energy with Eskom, they've indicated that the area is not even on the plans in the next 8 to 10 years. So this then caused the project to be implemented in the area. Community engagement, the type of project that we are bringing, what are the do's and don'ts? What are the limitations to the system? What kind of energy that you are bringing? So we had many meetings with the communities, and we have involved communities in a very deep and dynamic way, because each and every step of the project, the planning, we went for a planning meeting in Germany, we came back, we presented that plan to the community so that the community can accept, and also understand what is coming to them. I'm an engineer by profession, and I've got project management qualification as well. So my role now in the project, because I left the municipality, but I further joined later in the execution of the project as the social facilitator. So I was on the ground in the initial stages of the project, and I continued with the project until we have commissioned the project. The way the involvement of the community and the ownership that we tried to make sure that the community accepts. We even involved the community in signing off the design documentation. Yes, good. And also, yes, the design documentation was signed by the community leaders and the community member after several meetings of explaining. And my advantage there as a social facilitator and an engineer at the same time is that I could interpret and read the drawings and explain the design to the community with the language that they understand. The area speaks Xhosa, I'm also a Xhosa. So that was another advantage, to have a social facilitator that is also an engineer to translate the design and to understandable version by the community. The municipality, who is key, very key in the project in terms of ownership, also they signed off the design after it has been explained to them. And we got to a stage of execution. There were some delays on the project. However, what we did, we were going back to the community, communicating the delays that we are experiencing, so that the community is aware of each and every step of the project. Then when the construction started, all the communities were aware of what is coming, what are the limitations. What we did, the system that was designed there was designed in a sense that they should not use the stoves, because of the load. So the Department of Economic Development provided gas stoves to the community for cooking purposes. And during the execution, when we commissioned the first phase, which was the solar plant, if I can just explain how the system works, or what it involves. We had solar panels that are generating 675 kilowatt. We've got batteries, the backup batteries, and also a diesel generator for backup. And later in the project, we integrated a wind component, which was bringing, about 23 kilowatts to the system to enhance it. And when we commissioned our first phase, which was only solar, with your battery and your generator and your diesel generator, we have experienced that the community was indicating that every morning when they wake up, they don't have power. And we could understand that the power has been used overnight. And the system will pick up, the batteries will charge around 10-ish. Then when we integrated the wind, the problem was solved. So the community now has power 24 hours because we have our solar, we've got the battery system, we also have wind generation. We haven't used much of the diesel due to the price, due to financial constraints. So the project is running at Upper Water, the community is benefiting, and we have followed all the processes in terms of your NESA. NESA was involved, Department of Mineral Energy also was involved in the project. There were the key stakeholders that were involved in all the project steps until execution. Even now, the project is a pilot, and many ESCOM comes, and ESCOM is learning from that project, because what is happening currently is that most of the areas that are not electrified, the old villages, are very remote, and ESCOM cannot reach. Now, we've got those communities that can't have access to energy because of the terrain and the fact that they are very remote, and impossible for ESCOM to build an overhead lines to actually electrify those areas. So this kind of a project has really assisted in terms of the municipality for service delivery, in terms of the community benefiting. The women used to harvest wood to cook, you know, use paraffin to light, and they never had television sets, and they were just out of the system. They couldn't even get the news, you know, of what is happening within our country. But because of the project, the community has been transformed.
Fantastic.
Yes, new businesses, you know, has been developed in the area. And the area is actually very rich in agriculture. The land is very rich there. So now the people, because they've got electricity, they are able to pump water to irrigate their sites. Also, we've got a successful business.
Ms. Gwarube, I'm going to pause you there. I mean, I think what you're describing is a fantastic example of, you know, when people get energy access, electricity access, you know, all the things that can flow from that in terms of economic development and so on. So thank you for that.
Can I maybe just indicate something in quickly, just 1 minute,
yes.
Louise? What was very important on the project was to get the buy-in from the community. First of all. Second, and the spin-offs of that is that we never had any theft or vandalism, you know. And I remember at some point we started the first phase, we just had the solar panels and there was no fence. And the community took ownership. They were taking turns in terms of playing security for the solar panels until the fencing was done. So this is a very successful project in the Eastern Cape. We are very proud of the twining arrangement between the state of Lower Saxony and the Department of Economic Development.
Thank you. And you know, what I note about your input as well is that because it was you, that was an engineer that could engage with the community, and could have that relationship. I think many companies, you know, they don't necessarily have those community engagement skills. So I think it's an important aspect of the relationship between the project developer and the community who's going to socially own, is that there needs to be proper community engagement built in. So thank you. Not every project is going to have the advantage of having you. So people have to cater for that. Okay. So I think there's many benefits that we are hearing. There's also barriers and challenges. And I think one of the key issues that people, you know, grapple with is, so how are we going to pay for this? Which is where our next speaker, Mr. Bartlett, comes in. He's from the IDC. But Dr. Camps, you want to make one comment about before we proceed?
Yes, I was just going to mention that even if you don't have an engineer who's got that local context and the ability to engage locally, what we found is as long as you have local representatives working alongside those engineers, that those relationships can be built, and those engineers also benefit by then learning how to engage with those local representatives, because that's what we ended up doing, is just working closely alongside them and doing things like school engagement with the engineers and on-site work and negotiations, etc.
Okay, thank you. Interesting ways to cut this cake in a way. Okay, Mr. Bartlett, you're up. You're going to tell us about funding models. We can't hear you at the moment.
Sorry, I'm going to tell you a little bit about funding models, if I can get this to show. Is it showing?
It is showing. It's still in, it's not in presentation mode. So I don't know if you can change that. Otherwise, at the moment, it's readable.
Okay, let me do that. There you are. Okay, perfect. Great. Thank you very much. I'm going to go through it quite quickly in the interest of time. At the IDC, we basically have three different models for funding, which could be used for funding socially owned renewable energy. The first one being a project funding. That is typical REAP type initiatives where companies and so on can get the financing. But we also do, as IDC, find ways in which to ensure, because of the statutory arrangements, worker and community ownership. So IDC will very often use that opportunity there for warehousing of shares and so on behalf of workers and communities to make the projects work. Otherwise, the project's financing is normal debt and equity type arrangements. The second one is around normal commercial funding, which is primarily debt financing. And that supports, again, can support communities, workers, community trust, in entities to participate in these opportunities. Again, it's more commercial type operations. And then the one that I think is really useful at this point in time, and the one that I'm passionate about, is a social funding. And this is a grant funding program that supports the likes of social enterprises, cooperatives, trusts, partnerships, NPOs, hybrids, to try and, in other words, businesses that do good have either a social or environmental mission. And certainly the Janet's program, Janet's four models would primarily fit into this, I guess. And once the proof of concept has been proved, then obviously other funding would come in. So I'm very excited about this, and it's one of the areas that I'm responsible for. IDC has a number of social funding, but I'm going to focus primarily on the top one, which is a social and solidarity economy funding. In other words, social enterprises and special interventions. We, in about 2010, IDC took the decision to look at ways in which to bringing in marginalized and poor people into the center of the economy. And we decided that the social enterprise model was really a great opportunity. We also wanted to prove it as a concept in South Africa. And at that point in time, there was very little happening. So we started that, but we soon realized that it needed an ecosystem, and it needed to bring in partnerships and so on. So we expanded from the social enterprise fund to a special intervention fund, which is really about bringing together partnerships, building that ecosystem, and so on. Just the core elements of a social enterprise. These are businesses. I think it's very important that that I mention that they are businesses. It's not charity. It's not donations. It is about making sure that there's businesses and there's a generation of some sort of income. That the issue here is the surpluses that are generated or reinvested into the mission or to the community that is owning and managing the initiative. This special intervention fund again is as I said, broader ecosystem wasn't fully developed. Still isn't very well developed in the country. So it's about those partnerships, about ecosystems, it's about proving, piloting, and proof of concepts. It's about aligning and coordinating strategic plans and resources. So this whole and that's why we're so excited about the just transition, but also these energy opportunities, because I think it really lends itself to these two initiatives that we have. I'm not going to go through that, but the important thing of this funding, the funding is really to prove things. I mean, it's about social innovation. It's also about facilitating and being a catalyst for development. It's about sustaining where the market failure is endemic. It's about seeding, being the first mover and crowding in others. Very often we found in the social space that commercial and other investors were not necessarily falling over themselves to invest in the nature of these businesses of this nature. So we, with IDC's funding that went in, it was easier to crowd in other people's funding. And then obviously a part and parcel of that is signaling to make sure that there's credibility and visibility of the project. Some of the key areas that we focus on is the social environmental impact, community empowerment, diversification, again, very important for the just transition side of things. And it's all about reinvestment into communities. It's about social and local innovation. It's about social ownership, bringing communities, bringing in workers, and so on into the center of the economy, using various models such as aggregations, inclusive business. But it's ultimately, it's also about addressing some of the spatial disparities that we have. And why we're so passionate about this, why I'm so passionate about it in IDC, obviously gives us a lot of on-balance sheet funding to make it happen, is that these social businesses and businesses in the social and solidarity economy are generally innovative and early adopters. They lead by example, they're impact driven, they really advocate for social and environmental justice. They leverage expertise for advocacy and the like. But the really important part is that they have the proximity and the strong ties to communities to make these things happen. So I know I had 10 minutes, including speeches, questions, but yeah, I think we really see this as the type of funding that can actually make things happen, and particularly to try things, be innovative, and then allow it to go to the marketplace and to other funders. So I think it's very excited about the possibilities in the community energy space and social ownership of the renewable energy. Yeah, that's Louise. I hope I didn't keep you too long.
Mr. Bartlett, you were perfect, succinct, and timeless.
Great.
So I think what's very exciting for us to hear, because not everybody knows all of these things, that the IDC does have funding vehicles that could be suited to these purposes. So thank you for coming to share that with us. I think the problem will be, how to actually link empowered communities who want to roll with something like this up to yourself. And I think we need to look at, helping to create those kind of channels. Yeah, but let's open it. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's why I think it's been so nice collaborating with the team for Devon and Janet and so on. I think the more we can find opportunities and prove these that they really are sustainable opportunities for for economic and for social benefit, I think that's the better it's going to be. And I think more and more funding will then be made available by other sources.
Yeah, no, great. Okay, let's get people talking. And firstly, I want to invite Mr. Bosaletse in. Thank you for being patient for so long, sir. And I did see you put also a question in the Q&A. So maybe you just want to also raise it here and we can deal with your comments and that question. There we go. Go ahead, sir. You've muted yourself again. Oh, there you are.
Sorry about that, Louise. Thanks for the opportunity, and very much thanks as well to Professor Janet Cherry. Thanks, Prof, for what we have heard, what you were saying about cooperatives, because what we know in the global north, we partnered with ResCoops in Europe. That was in around 2013 to see as to how they were implementing renewable energy strategies in Europe. So hence, Food Energy Water South Africa Tertiary Cooperative came into being. The only challenge that we are seeing now with speakers today is us speaking the trust and various formations that were never tested before, as we are seeing that renewable energy cooperatives were tested in Europe, and they are very, very, very successful. I was expecting that even today, as Prof was talking to cooperatives, that now people will look into cooperatives as to how are we moving forward with cooperatives. The other thing is the job losses that we heard from the Eastern Cape, the EV, the automotive sector, and as well having workers ownership there, but it is not clear as to how those workers are being formalized, because now it is very important, as mentioned, that cooperatives will be key in taking our communities out of poverty. The other one is our coal miners in Mpumalanga, as well as Eskom employees. We are not talking about workers' cooperatives. And as we know, in South Africa, we have two very successful workers' cooperatives. The other one is in the Northwest, in the Klerksdorp area. The other one is in KZN. They are very successful, but now we are not talking to that. We are talking about trust. We are talking about various formations that we don't have any test on. It seems as if we are now trying new things when we have data that we can go onto and then extract from such, looking into the cooperatives in Europe and the likes. Even in Asia, cooperatives are very successful in renewable energy. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing, your knowledge to us. I think it's very important that we all keep sharing, so that we all know about different good examples of, what is happening out there, and we can create this kind of body of knowledge and community that can work on this issue. Is there anyone else who wants to come in? There are many questions in the Q&A, which I wish people would just speak out, and we can learn from your question or your comment. Okay, so one of the issues I see different people are raising is this question of local manufacture. of the renewable energy technologies, because, you know, that's a way to create jobs around this. And so I just want to, I don't know, I think we're going to go deep into it in this webinar, but the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition is creating the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan. And the whole intention of that master plan is to see how we can localize manufacture in this country as far and as extensively as possible. So just to offer that information. You know, I wonder, Professor Cherry and Professor van Groenen, if you might not come back into the conversation to talk about this question of social, you know, state ownership, where we can have a debate, you know, between my view that also counts as social ownership, but never mind me. State ownership, social ownership, and these other kinds of things that people are speaking about, you know, where there's social enterprises and where there might be subsidies of renewable energy systems going into communities, but the community is not necessarily, the systems aren't necessarily socially owned. So to go back, you know, right to the beginning of your input about your definition of social ownership, because some people have asked a question about that, if you don't mind. And Devin, I see your, no, it's not Devin's hand. Janet?
Yes, hi. I wonder, I've got other members of my team on if they would like to respond, if they can indicate. But just on the, I was very happy about Bungani's input to this discussion about cooperatives, because we defined social as essentially some form of collectives of individuals. So it's either a community, as in where people live, a residential community, or a cooperative of a particular group of people with a common interest, or a worker cooperative, or a trade union of workers in a particular company or something like that, residents of a particular informal settlement. We did not define state as social, i.e. we said public, i.e. state-owned enterprises or state-owned facilities are not by definition social, but they can be in partnership with social. So, for example, let's say the municipality owns a mini grid, and let's say, if we looked at the Blinkwater case, which was presented very well, so we covered the Blinkwater pilot in our report, and we said the Blinkwater pilot is an initiative of local government. It's actually a government initiative to provide a service, which it did quite successfully. It's a good pilot, but we didn't classify that as a community ownership. I.e. that was a local government project to provide electricity. But if you had a situation where the municipality partnered with residents of a township or a village to each household having solar panels, and they then owned those solar panels, and they got assistance to have a mini grid which provided for surplus electricity to be used in a community facility, which is then owned by that community. That would be a community-owned project, even though the panels are maybe provided by the municipality. So anyway, there could be forms of ownership which are cooperative or social, which are working together with a public enterprise. And also there can be forms where they work together with private enterprise. So the REAP model, where you have a community trust And again, we looked at this, and I think Bongani is right to say we must be a little bit wary of saying community trusts are adequate in this case. What we really want is distributed ownership of not just some kind of small percentage of benefit which goes into a community trust to support a school or something like that. And this should be real economic benefit. So it's not just about having access to electricity, which the municipalities should be providing. But we know that the municipalities are in dire straits in South Africa. So it is important to capacitate municipalities, but it's not giving municipalities more funding to provide solar panels is not providing social ownership. It's just trying to give the municipalities a bit of extra capacity, which they need. So it's not, I mean, I don't see those things in conflict. But anyway, let me not talk too long. Let me see if there are other people who want to respond.
No, thank you for that.
Sorry, I thought Sunny's point was very important, which is about what is the purpose of this. And we said, yes, there are, I mean, what he was putting forward is our model 1, which is the mini grid. And the purpose of that model is to provide access to electricity for people for benefit, for direct benefit for people to use. But the other models, the private social partnerships are for economic benefit, for interest. I mean, for economic interest, for people to get money, to get income from these things, from production of energy and sale of energy.
Can I respond, Janet?
Yeah, no, Sunny and I have been having this debate for a long time.
I'd rather you didn't, Mr. Morgan, because there's some other people who've been waiting to speak. So let's give them a turn first. Mr. Mopule, I see that you were trying to come in and your hand was going up and down. Would you like to contribute? Clement? Then otherwise I'll go to Ms. Lehman Grube. If you'd like to make a comment or ask a question of any three of these presenters. Come in, Katrina. No. Okay, Mr. Morgan, debate away.
No, it's not a debate, not a debate. I wanted to go back to the central question, Louise, that you posed earlier on, right? About what does it mean? Because we need to get the definitions correct, and we can seize the opportunity, right? So when I wrote the paper originally, there was a very short definition. And I'm going to focus on community-owned, right? Community-owned energy refers to projects where a community initiates, develops, operates, or benefits from a renewable energy source. Now we're talking about the economic. I'm on the same page as Janet about how do the economic benefits flow. So I expanded this definition because depending on your objective and what you want to get out of the process, you'll use those set of definitions. It's almost like confirmation bias, right? So this definition works because then it will address all four of Nelson Mandela University's projects. So the expanded definition is where the community is an investor or the legal owner of the energy installation. It's only 4 points. Where the community is an active participant or partner in that installation, or where the energy installation is run by the community, as in members of the community are employed to manage and operate the installation. And lastly, where the community is the beneficiary of the energy installation, either as an end user of the power generated or as a recipient of the funds that flow from the sale of electricity generated by the project. Now, this idea of economic benefit, it's not just about the rands and cents of selling energy. I think that's a red herring for us in South Africa or in the global sphere at the moment, simply because energy is so cheap renewable energy, and solar particular, is so cheap. I gave the example in the chat. In 2013, 1 megawatt grid tie would have cost us 20 million. Today, I can build it for 5 million. Also, the lack of energy, the load shedding issue, and energy poverty is still a real threat in South Africa. So we are not going to make tons of money from selling electricity back to the grid. That's just the reality of the situation, because we need it more than we can sell it. That's the one issue. If we don't have the load shedding problem at all, and there's no energy poverty, then yes, we can make some rands and cents from selling it, because obviously it's cheap to build and you can sell it at a nice rate, but that would depend. The problem is we produce renewable energy, solar particularly, when no one needs it, when the sun shines, not in the evenings and in the morning peaks. And the other issue, this idea, we fixated in South Africa on this issue of job creation, rightfully so, because unemployment 18 to 24 is 63%. But we're not going to do it by manufacturing solar panels in South Africa, simply because economies of scale prevent us from doing it. The solar panel producer we only have one domestic solar panel producer of a commercial scale, and then another small initiative where they're making small panels. That the particular company is not competitive in the market. Solar panels are today at its cheapest in the world. I got an inquiry this morning from KwaZulu-Natal for someone wanting 6 million solar panels for an initiative. And they want the solar panel company to produce the panels in South Africa, or even just assemble it. You know what the company said when I called them just before this call? 6 million solar panels is not big enough for us to have a plant in South Africa. So we have to find other ways. We don't make inverters.
So Mr. Morgan, there's a lot of components involved in renewable energy that we could
must build all the others. Yes, but
exactly.
not the panels. The solar panels, the mounting structures, the poles, the lights, the cables. We can do all of that in South Africa.
So now let Katrina, your hand is back up. Please speak.
Thanks, Louise. Sorry about that. I'm Katrina. I'm an associate researcher at the Southern Centre for Inequality Studies. My question is for Prof. Cherry. I saw that you had a slide about financing that you kind of whizzed through. Would you mind sharing that with us and going through it a little bit, kind of some of the financing thinking around the 4 models you presented? Thank you.
That's not a bad idea, because it speaks to Mr. Bartlett's presentation as well. Ms. Tengwa, do you want to come in again before they get those slides up?
Yes, thank you very much, Louise.
Go ahead.
Mine is a quick one as well. Just to say, obviously we're coming from different perspectives here, and with the modeling that we have done in our municipality, the initial procurement from independent power producers for 400 megawatts of additional alternatives that will go into the grid to help us with stage 4 load shedding. It's a lot of money that's involved there. So what this means is that with the money that we collect revenue around for electricity sales, some of that money will be diverted to procuring from alternative sources, including renewable energy. The point here is that's money coming from the coffers. Us as the coffers need to be sure that that money has been used in a justifiable manner. Now that we're not procuring from Eskom, we're happy to procure from Eskom. We're not asking any questions. Now, if we're going to include other players, then it brings us to the question of a just energy transition. And it is a lot of money that we're talking about. So the municipalities will have a huge buying power for energy. And I was happy with the presentation from Mr. Bartlett, because in one of the talks that we had last week with at the Salga KZN Energy Summit, Nedbank was there. Nedbank is not funding any of this socially owned renewable power projects. And for me, that was a problem, because they were saying that should be between the municipality and the social trust or whatever model has been, the community arranges themselves around. But I'm happy with IDC that it is possible for those to be funded, because like it or not, we will be purchasing from independent power producers using the revenue that we collect from citizens, and these will be long-term contracts, 10 to 20 years. There's a lot of money to be made there, and we don't want this money to fall into the hands of the same people that are billionaires today, made money from contracts with the municipality on housing and all that. A just transition is not that. That is why I felt like, we need to unpack a little bit more, but it's very promising in terms of the research that has been done. But perhaps Professor Janet here, the academia is very important to this for us in terms of, the policy directive going forward. So if we look at the fact that a huge chunk of the revenue of the municipality for a basic service like electricity is now going to be opened up to other players other than Eskom, whom we have always believed acts in the public interest, then how do we then, deal with it in a way that's going to make sure that we don't, fail foul of fairness, transparency, justice, and everything. I hope that we get to a point where we research such things. Thank you.
Daryl, maybe you can put back the slides and put the one on the financing. And if I can make a point quickly about, okay, firstly, funds from the public, from the treasury in the form of the equitable share, which go to municipalities for service provision. The first and very obvious point is that these have to be used properly. And I think we know the study, the Paris study, which showed how the funds for free basic electricity are not used by municipalities to procure free basic electricity for residents. So that's the first point. Darrell, can you go to the slide on the points we made about funding? Not past the models. Yeah. On financing, yeah, here we go. Funding for viability. So yeah, we said we have to look at treasury and how municipalities are using funds. We heard from our stakeholders real concern and quite a deal of suspicion about government entering into loan agreements and without consultation, and what the implications were in terms of debt and so on. So there's quite a lot of concern about that. Yeah, we looked at possibility for trade union investment arms, investing in renewable energy as a viable investment, which would give them very good returns if they could be convinced of this. And yeah, this issue about international financial institutions, there's a great deal of wariness about going into debt to these institutions and what the implications of those are. I want to ask Tony Martell, who's one of our researchers, if he wants to comment on this. We had some extensive debate on the issue of subsidies and subsidized tariffs and what has happened in Europe in that regard.
Thanks. Yeah. So going back to and building off of the point made by Sunny Morgan about the case for remuneration of the generation of electricity for projects the scale in which we're proposing, which are generally the size of smaller working class communities, not utility scale. So the key issue is, of course, in contrast to other forms of electricity generation, such as coal or oil or diesel, the renewable energy, such as wind or solar, they have high capital expenditures and low operational expenditures, which means that the cost of producing electricity is much lower than other forms of generation, which also then means that the potential remuneration that you will receive from the generation of electricity on its own is much lower, which is why in the case of Europe, for that 5-year period, they had introduced feed-in tariffs for installations wherein there were neighborhood cooperatives and other such forms of renewable energy in which they proliferated, but then they basically came to a much slower rate of growth after the removal of the subsidy on the feed-in tariff. So it will certainly be the case that where communities may or workers may be generating renewable energy and receiving some sort of remuneration from that, they will be paying more for the retail rate of electricity than they will be receiving in terms of generation. So on that basis, it was the recommendation that there should be a subsidy for the generation of electricity, and the point was raised about the issue of where that will come from, and the sort of quandary that municipalities are in, because I mean it's beyond the scope of what we're discussing here, but it has to do with the municipal financing model and its contradictory mandates around recovering costs through provision of basic services, and also providing free basic services for those who cannot afford. So those are the issues, and of course the key piece of any discussion about subsidies would have to then fall onto a discussion about where is the recovery for those subsidies, if this was to be actually a real proposal, because if it is to then come on the other side of the meter in the form of a retail rate, in addition to a retail rate, that then becomes a cost that's imposed on other people in working class communities who are not privileged to such, community-owned or socially owned renewable energy projects. So that's very important. And it was also, it has also been an issue where feed-in tariffs have been implemented in California, in different parts of Europe. So those are, I hope I addressed the issue about the subsidies.
Thanks,
Thank you. Okay, I think we're going to wrap it now. I want to thank everybody who took the trouble to come and talk to us about, your examples, your thoughts, your research, etc. I think that what we've done in this webinar is opened up some of the questions and discussions which need to be taken further. I understand that, if you're commissioned to do a piece of research at a certain point, that that has to have a boundary. But I think as the PCC itself, under Mr. Pillay, Mr. Devon Pillay from the Secretariat, this is an ongoing discussion and arena of work. And I think that different people in the room today have given us all kinds of different examples of what they are trying. And I think it's really good to keep harvesting those examples and learning from each other, and, deciding whether it's social ownership or something else, and looking at where to find the money and how to overcome the barriers and how to build community organizations that are robust to be able to be the owners of these things. And thank you to everyone who attended and shared your thoughts and questions and ideas with us as well. So I don't know if you still want to say anything, Devin, to close us off.
Thanks, thanks, Louise. Apologies for that, Lindy, and I in the same room. Just to add to what you were saying, and correctly so, this is just the start of us holding within our economic diversification initiatives, social ownership. I think we see the social ownership activities that we're involved in, particularly this research, expanding to further research. We want to link this to pilots that allows us then to link this to funding models. Some work has started on this, and essentially what we want to ensure is, I think to some extent, the democratization of our economy. We want to get more and more people involved in terms of ownership of our economy, and we think this is the best means to achieve this, one of the best means to achieve this. So, I'm in noting the time, I'm not gonna, elaborate any further, but just to say that thank you to the participants, thank you to the panelists, thank you to NMU for pulling this together, and thank you for the organizers for organizing this event. We're available, our emails are online, and colleagues that are participating are welcome to contact us at any point in time, and we'll respond to them. Thanks, Louise.
Thank you. And the presentations will go up on the PCC website.
I can't hear you.
You can't hear me. The presentations will go up on the PCC website, and the
report will be published.
And
on
the
website.
recording and the academic report, the study report.
Yeah. Okay,
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Louise.
Bye.
Thanks for a great teaching. Well done.